Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana nata pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasha dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murtnani Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripakrite Yashri Chaitanya Rupo Bhutanvan Premarasam Kalo Jayatam Surito Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadanastrinam Dantayar Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhyudisyam Janma Janmani Vairagya Yug Bhakti Rasam Prayatnai Rapayayan Mam Anubhipsu Mandam Kripam Budhirya Paraduka Dukhi Sanatanam Tam Prabhurashrayami Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasada Smaratam Brajandhum Shri Rupa Padakamala Shrita Chetasame Chittam Satam Madhukari Yatu Padme Bhakterya Nikilartavaga Jananiya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandatishaya Prada Vishayajat Sukyat Vimuktiryaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Ya Karya Vrajadukavad Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Today we'll continue again our discussion of the Rupa Sanatana Stotram, composed by Sri Govardhana Bhatta of the lineage of Gadadhar Bhatta within the parampara of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. So last time we introduced the text, we went through the first two verses where there was two statements, one in praise of Radha Krishna as the emerald inlaid in gold that was the ultimate jewel to be attained, and in praise of Mahaprabhu, who had inspired his followers to reveal this jewel that had been hidden in the casket of the heart of Shukadev Goswami. So today we come to verse 3, which next features a pranam to Gadadhar Pandit. So we have first Radha Krishna, Mahaprabhu, and then Gadadhar Pandit. So, Shri Chaitanya Harer Viyoga Vikalo Ya Ketra Sanyasavan Apyarat Parihritya Dhama Jagatam Natasya Paschadyayo Parshan Prema Payurud Nidhim Jayatiyo Govinda Padabjayo Bande Shri Gadadharam Purudayam Tam Radhika Rupinam. he who being disconcerted by separation from Sri Chaitanya Hari, immediately forsook the abode of the Lord of the universe, that is Jagannath Puri, and went after Sri Chaitanya, although he was a votary of Kshetra Sannyas, and who triumphs, showering down a milk ocean of prem for the lotus feet of Govinda. I offer obeisance to him, Srila Gadadhara, abounding in compassion, a form of Radhika. In this verse, the author speaks in praise of one of Sriman Mahaprabhu's most intimate companions, Sri Gadadhar Pandit. The author describes Sriman Mahaprabhu as, quote, Sri Chaitanya Hari, to emphasize his view that Sriman Mahaprabhu is Sri Hari, that is Sri Krishna of Gokula himself. The author also speaks of Sri Gadadhar Pandit as being a form of Sri Radhika, the second of his Ishta Devatas mentioned in the opening verse, in accord with the view expressed by Sri Kavi Karnapur. So in the Guru Ganadesh Dipika, we hear this description, Shri Radha Prema Rupa Ya Pura Vrindavaneshwari Sa Shri Gadadharo Gaura Vallabha Panditakya. She who was formerly the embodiment of Prema and goddess of Vrindavan, Shri Radha, is now the beloved of Gaura, Shri Gadadhar Pandit. Although none of the Braja Goswamis, such as Sri Sanatan Pad, Sri Rupa Pad, Sri Raghunath, there's a typo, Raghunath Das Goswami Pad, Sri Jiva Pad, or Sri Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami Pad, ever describe Sri Gadadhar Pandit specifically as a manifestation of Sri Radhika, this view seems to have been held and propagated by the disciples, grand disciples, and so forth of Sri Gadadhar Pandit, who lived in Braja in the 16th and 17th centuries, as can be observed, for example, in the Sadhana Dipika, written by Radha Krishna Das Goswami Pad, a great grand disciple of Sri Gadadhar Pandit, who served as the Mahanta of the Govinda Dev Mandir in Vrindavan in the mid-17th century. So this is a subject that we've talked about before, but just to touch upon it briefly, there in the Guru Ganadesh Dipika, here as I've quoted, Kavi Karnapur speaks of this view of seeing Gadadhar to be Radha. And he says that this has been indicated, or he derives this from a statement of Sarup Damodar, where Sarup Damodar uses the word Lakshmi. So, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, interestingly, we see that Kaviraj Goswami nowhere actually says that Gadadhar Pandit is Radha. He describes Gadadhar as being the Antaranga Shakti. He also uses descriptions using the word Lakshmi, but he stops short, so to speak, of equating Gadadhar with Radha specifically. So, still, it's observed within the Gadadhar Paribar that the view of Gadadhar being Radha is favored. So, likely, a combination of a view that was held by Gadadhar's followers as well as with the support of the Guru Ganadesh Dipika, this view has been prevalent in Vrindavan since the earliest times of the tradition. And we see evidence of that as I'm referring to here in the Sadhana Dipika of Radhakrishna Das Goswami. So, it may have been, as some scholars have considered, that Kaviraj Goswami stopped short of speaking of Gadadhar as Radha because one of the main points that he wants to emphasize in the Chaitanya Charitamrita is that Mahaprabhu is imbued with Radha's bhav, that effectively Mahaprabhu is the presence of the presence of Radha is there in Mahaprabhu. So to posit that someone else was also Radha could be perceived as detracting from or seeing a lack of focus upon that inner purpose of Mahaprabhu's avatar, or rather Krishna's avatar as Mahaprabhu, to relish Radha's bhav. And then there are also some among the Gaudiyas who get into some fine analysis about how exactly Mahaprabhu is Radha and Krishna, and there's this idea of him being suvalita, or enveloped in Radha's bhav, and then some have used the analogy like when a murti is made, then there's a particular metal is used to shape the murti, and then a finer or a golden or a brass or a bright colored metal is then poured over that base to create the outer portion that is the visible portion, so to speak. So some have given this sort of interpretation that it's really Krishna, but there's this enveloping of Radha's luster and Radha's bhav, but it's not exactly Radha, it's her bhav, her luster are there. Whereas others have taken the viewpoint that no, there's like a literal complete inner merging or combination of the two. And different rasikas may relish things or perceive things in different ways. I'm not here to make a case that it can only be seen one way or another. As per the verse of Sri Rupa Damodar quoted at the beginning of the Charitamrita, and as per the descriptions in the Chaitanyashtakams of Rupa Gosvami and Raghunath Goswami and so on, we see that generally Mahaprabhu is treated as Krishna, but as being absorbed in relishing Radha's bhav. But if particular Vaishnavas want to see or envision, so to speak, a presence of Radha in some other manner based on certain statements in the Ramananda Sangvad or other places, then personally I say no harm, or I classify that in the subjective and the personal category, as opposed to something that we need to police about. No, your conception is wrong. Like if there's a general acquaintance with the Goswami Siddhanta, then how exactly some may envision this, or how exactly they may wish to contemplate it, I feel that there's some scope for individual preference in that regard, or individual manner of relish. But apart from that, to observe that the Goswamis, in that emphasis upon seeing Mahaprabhu as Krishna enveloped in Radha's bhav, don't speak of another within his Parshad group as being Radha. That also kind of leans into the idea that Radha is there in Mahaprabhu. Yet, as I'm showing, Kavi Karnapur presents the view of Gadadhar Pandit being Radha, and many in the Sampradaya are fond of that view and who see that, and there has been a tradition of Gaur Gadadhar worship within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and many have seen that as like a parallel form of Radha Krishna worship. So, jai to all of these forms. I'm not here to say anyone is the only way or the sole correct way or anything like this, but as per the different viewpoints that have come down in different paramparas, as per the different manner of contemplation that is found to be satisfying, then there is scope for all of these perspectives. So, nevertheless, I'm pointing out that it doesn't seem to be precisely the Goswami's viewpoint that Gadadhar was Radha. Still, the author of our composition, this Rupa Sanatana Stotram, he's obviously of this view because he's expressing it right here in the text. So, perhaps, this is a testament to the prevalence of the influence of the disciples and followers of Gadadhar Pandit in Braj in the early 1st century of the Gaudiya Sampradaya in that area. I would think that likely, Govardhana Bhatt, who's not directly in the line of Gadadhar Pandit by most people's understanding, that he nevertheless might have, although he's, expressing such ikantik or such strong fixity in Rupa Sanatana, he might nevertheless also adopt this viewpoint, which isn't actually instated by Rupa Sanatana, because of it having been a very prevalent and widely accepted idea within his social milieu, if you will. This is my 2 cents about perhaps how these things are coming out like this. In any case, we respect the views of all and aren't here to try to tread on anyone's sentiments. So, Gadadhar Pandit, a form of Radha, this point is commented on. So now for the other things mentioned in the verse. The Leela alluded to by the author in this verse of Sri Gadadhar Pandit forsaking his vow of Kshetra Sannyas, that is, the vow of residing at one specific tirtha for life, as a gesture of affection for Sriman Mahaprabhu, is recorded by Sri Kaviraj Goswami in his Chaitanya Charitamrita as follows. So this Leela that is being spoken of here by our author is described in the Charitamrita. And I think I'll just forego reading the Bengali if I may. It'll just be a bit quicker, and it's a bit of a long passage. So, when Gadadhar Pandit went along with Prabhu as he was departing for Vrindavan from Nilachal, Prabhu forbade him, "Do not give up your Kshetra Sannyas." So Gadadhar had come from Nadia with Mahaprabhu when Mahaprabhu first left Nadia shortly after his sannyas, and he had dwelled in Nilachal since that time. And after Mahaprabhu received his residence at the place of Kashi Mishra, Mahaprabhu also arranged a residence for Gadadhar Pandit, and this happened in a divine way where a murti of Sri Krishna known as Gopinath was unearthed in a garden of tamarind trees, and so there at this garden site, Gadadhar was given a place and a temple was made where he could reside and worship this deity. So this deity became known as Tota Gopinath. So Tota means garden. So the Gopinath who was found in the garden. So Gadadhar took up residence in this garden in a temple that was prepared, and he worshipped Gopinath, and this was his personal deity that he personally did the worship of every day. And it's described that Mahaprabhu would come and visit Gadadhar daily, and there would be a pot. Gadadhar would read the Bhagavat. Mahaprabhu and other companions would sit and hear the Bhagavat from him. And there's a painting that was made of this, which is very widely known, which shows Gadadhar reading Mahaprabhu and Advaitacharya, Sarvabhauma, Ramananda, and some other companions, Swarup Damodar, Raghunath Das Goswami, all seated around listening. This is what is referred to, and also in the course of receiving this place and this deity and expressing his desire to not return to Bengal but to stay in Nilachal, Gadadhar adopted the vow of what is called Kshetra Sannyas, where he vowed to live his whole life in that kshetra, or that particular sacred area, and not go anywhere else. So this was one type of renunciation, or one sort of rite of renunciation that some sadhus elected to take. So Gadadhar accepted this, and so when Mahaprabhu was leaving Nilachal, this is the second time. In other words, Mahaprabhu first went on a tour of the south and Gadadhar stayed in Nilachal. Now he's returned from the south, and then after some time he's again going to travel towards Vrindavan. So Gadadhar doesn't want to be left back alone again. He grew up with Mahaprabhu, he left home with Mahaprabhu, he came to Nilachal, and he tolerated Mahaprabhu being away for almost 2 years when he toured the south. So now when Mahaprabhu is going out on another tour, who knows how long he'll be gone, I can't bear the idea of staying here without you, I'm going with you. So he just started to come. So that is the context here. It says, when Gadadhar went along, Prabhu forbade him, quote, do not give up your Kshetra sannyas. In other words, you've taken this vow to stay here in Nilachal, so you have to stay, don't come with me. Pandit replied, wherever you are, there is Nilachal. Let my Kshetra sannyas go to Rasatala. So, what we would say, hell, so, let it go to hell, I don't care. Wherever you are, that is Nilachal. I want to stay with you. In other words, what my nishta is in is not the Kshetra, my nishta is in you. That's what I'm really devoted to. That's what I'm really dedicated to. So I just want to be wherever you are. I don't want to be bound just to this place. Prabhu said, render service to Gopinath, meaning the deity whose worship I have entrusted to you here in Nilachal. So now Mahaprabhu is giving another reason. Not only have you taken a vow to stay here, but you have a deity that you need to worship. And this was not a small deity that you could travel with. For anyone who's been to Puri and visited, Tota Gopinath is quite a large deity. So, you also have your commitment to your seva here. So for that reason also you can't leave. Pandit replied, sight of your feet is 1 crore of services to Gopinath. That is, I consider seeing your feet equal to worshipping Gopinath 1 crore of times. Why should I stay here and worship Gopinath? If I'm just in your presence, if I'm just able to honor you in some way, that is everything. That's more than even worshipping my deity. Prabhu said, do not give up your service. The fault of doing so will come to me. Stay here and render your service. That will be my satisfaction. So Mahaprabhu's view is that, I don't want you to give up the service that you've taken up of Gopinath, because that will, to neglect that commitment that you've made will bring some negative repercussion, and I will be held responsible for it, because if you come with me, it will be seen that if I'm allowing that, then I'll be held responsible. Just as, it's said in Hari Bhakti Vilas that there's a statement in the section about the Guru where it says that as the sins of the populace come upon the king, so the sins of the disciple come upon the Guru. So the idea is that, and it also says the sins of the wife come upon the husband. So the idea is that when someone is in the role of responsibility, then if the person who's under their responsibility does some wrong, then the responsibility isn't just the actor, but it's the enabler, or it's the person whose responsibility is to ensure that that person is well behaved. So in that sense, he's saying that, you're a follower of mine, so if I allow you to do this, then I'm ultimately responsible for the wrong that you're committing. So I'm not ready for that. In other words, that will be my satisfaction. I won't be pleased by having, by this fault of neglecting the service of the deity and the sannyas to come upon me. That's not pleasing to me. So I want you to stay there, and I want you to continue the seva of the deity. Pandit said, all faults will come upon me, and I will not go with you. I will go alone. So Gadadhar Pandit is determined. So he's saying, no. It's not that you're gonna have to be held responsible for it because you took me with you. I'll travel separately from your party, so no one can say that you took me with you and therefore it's your fault that I didn't do the seva. I'll travel on my own, so it's obvious that I'm just doing this by my own will, not because I've been requested or, enticed to do this by you. So the fault won't come to you, it'll just come to me. I will go to see Ai, meaning your mother in Navadip. I will not go for your sake, and I will be the bearer of the fault of abandoning my vow and service. So this is a bit of a twist. In other words, actually he wants to go to be with Mahaprabhu, to honor Mahaprabhu, but he's saying this as a ploy and saying, oh, I'm not going to travel with you, and I'm not even going to be with you. I'm just also going at the same time because I want to go and honor your mother, who he also grew up with, who's like an auntie to him. And so I'm not going because of you, and therefore I'm going for my own purpose, at my own risk, on my own responsibility, and therefore the fault of leaving my seva, the fault of leaving my vow, it'll all come to me. So don't tell me that you'll be held responsible. So this is his argument, so to speak, but truly speaking, it's not that easy. In other words, it's not that you can just, oh yeah, because I'm doing it, it won't come to you. Still, actually, in the case of a follower with, if they act like this, it's still, if the leader acquiesces to this, it's still in one sense an enablement, but he's nevertheless pushing this point out of his expression of love. So saying this, Pandit Goshai went separately. In other words, he just defied Mahaprabhu in this respect. Upon coming to Katak, which is quite some distance from Puri. From Puri you come to Bhubaneswar, and then from Bhubaneswar you go further on to the next city, Katak, which was the capital at the time. So, many days walk outside of Puri. Saying this, Pandit Goshai went separately. Upon coming to Katak, Prabhu had him brought into his company. Pandit's prema for Chaitanya cannot be understood. In other words, how Gadadhar's love came out like this is difficult to comprehend. Like grass, he gave up his vow and service to Sri Krishna. Prabhu was internally satisfied with his conduct, but he took hold of his hand and spoke to him with the anger of uninhibited love, or what's called pranaya. So they're very intimate. So in that context of intimacy, there's also scope for expression of anger. So Mahaprabhu is doing that. And in this case, that anger that he's showing is also a gesture of love for Gadadhar. So he's actually pleased, but nevertheless, it's not just about being pleased or just about Gadadhar. He also has to manage the social perception of this dynamic as a leader of many followers and so forth. So he says, quote, "You will give up your vow and service. This was your objective, and that has now been fulfilled, since you have now left and come to a distant place." In other words, there's Puri itself, and then more broadly there's what's called the Purushottam Kshetra, which includes Bhubaneswar and is this large conch-shaped broader region. But to my knowledge, by this conversation happening at the point in Katak, the idea is that they've crossed out even of that extended kshetra, so to speak. So Mahaprabhu is saying, okay, there's no way around it at this point. You've now, by any amount, come out of the Purushottam Kshetra. So you've now definitely broken your vow, because you've come to this distant place. So you want to remain in my company. You desire your own happiness. Your two dharmas are now gone. That is, you have broken your vow and abandoned your service to Gopinath. And I am unhappy. If you want my happiness, go to Nilachal. This is my oath. If, that is regardless of whether you say anything more. So Mahaprabhu is saying, my opinion is firm. I'm not going to reconsider this. If you want to make me happy, just go back. I don't want you to go any further. You've already done what you've tried to do. There's no undoing it now. But nevertheless, I don't want to aid and abet it any further, so go back. So Mahaprabhu is internally pleased with his behavior. In other words, he sees this as an act of Gadadhar's love, and he appreciates that. but at the same time, for social considerations, for the sake of not establishing unfavorable precedents and so forth, he doesn't literally want this to go on any further. So he, instructs Gadadhar to go back. Saying this, Mahaprabhu boarded the boat on the bank of the Chitrotpala river, and Pandit fainted and fell right there. Prabhu gave an order to Sarvabhauma to take Pandit back to Nilachal. The Bhattacharya said to Pandit, "Arise, such is Prabhu's Leela. You know that Krishna gave up his own vow, and controlled by his grace for his bhaktas, kept Bhishma's vow." So here's Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya quoting Bhagavatam to Gadadhar, where Bhishma Dev said, "Giving up your own promise not to pick up a weapon in the battle, to make my vow come true, Krishna jumped down when he was situated on the chariot, seized a wheel of the chariot, and rushed forward like a lion to kill an elephant. The earth shook beneath his feet, and his upper garment fell from his shoulder." In this way, Prabhu, tolerating separation from you, has carefully protected your vow. So this is Sarvabhauma's attempt to console Gadadhar, and saying it's not that Mahaprabhu is really angry with you, or that he really is unhappy with you, or that he doesn't want to please you, but that he, like Krishna, wanted that his own bhakta would observe his own vows and have the honor of doing so. Mahaprabhu wanted that Gadadhar would also have such honor. So, therefore, the way Krishna honored Bhishma, by breaking his own vow to uphold Bhishma's vow, Sarvabhauma is saying, you can think of Mahaprabhu's denial of you getting to tour with him any further as like this affection that Krishna showed to Bhishma. In this way, Bhattacharya consoled him, and the two of them, filled with grief, came back to Nilachal. Bhaktas forsake their dharma and karma for Prabhu, but Prabhu does not tolerate any breach of a bhakta's dharma. Chaitanya's feet soon meet with a person who hears of this transformation, that is extraordinary expression of prema. So, Mahaprabhu doesn't, we can broadly say, generally speaking, it's valuable for bhaktas to uphold their vows, to continue the dedicated daily services that they've accepted, and they shouldn't take those things lightly in the least. And that, quote, niyam nishta, or that fixity in the rules or the regulated practices that one has adopted, that's a very important foundation and a very important support for a sadhaka along the path. However, it's not all in all, or it's not everything. And this gesture of Gadadhar is in one sense a very deep or extraordinary expression of prema, because he's showing that. He's showing that there is ultimately something beyond just niyam nishta. There is ultimately nishta in the person for whom one is following the niyam to attain. That really the nishta should be in the object, not in the rule that's being followed as a means to achieve the object. And in this case, he's choosing to highlight that distinction with his behavior. And he's ready to undergo the disrepute that would come from people who don't understand all of that, thinking that he, didn't follow his sannyas and abandoned his deity and so on. So the fact that he is ready and willing to forsake even his social standing to make a gesture of love is a very profound gesture of love. It's a great test, actually, of the sincerity of one's devotion, because with being, very resolute in one's practice, inevitably comes social recognition and respect for being such. And so, there then becomes certain facilities, certain benefit that is acquired by that recognition and respect that one receives. And so to then ultimately prove that really one isn't doing it for the sake of that recognition and respect, and is even ready to disregard that recognition and respect, is a testament to the purity of the love. So this is where Gadadhar Pandit is coming from, so to speak, and Mahaprabhu appreciates that, but nevertheless, this is something that is not easily understood by everyone, and isn't meant to be, taken as a method, so to speak, that Mahaprabhu wants that in general the niyam nishta be observed, and so he wants to set this precedent. So here the summary, that bhaktas forsake their dharma and karma for Prabhu. In other words, really they're all about Prabhu, not just about the dharma for Prabhu or the karma for Prabhu. But Prabhu doesn't tolerate a breach of a bhakta's dharma. But Mahaprabhu doesn't want that goes on. In other words, except in rare cases or apart from exceptions, he always wants that a bhakta is seen to be successful and steady in the observance of their commitments. So hence this interesting lila. When Sriman Mahaprabhu later returned to Nilachal after visiting Gauda, but not traveling all the way to Vrindavan, because he felt it proper to travel to Vrindavan alone, or only with one companion, rather than in a large group, as he had been traveling in Gauda, he also expressed his affection for Sri Gadadhar Pandit as follows. So when he gets back to Puri, they had this meeting where Mahaprabhu says, no, and Gadadhar faints and Mahaprabhu goes off in the boat. So now, a long time later, many months later, Mahaprabhu returns. So this is, if you part with someone on an uneven note, let's call it, it can sometimes weigh upon you, or it can, the mind can go to that matter again and again. So Mahaprabhu shows attention and affection for Gadadhara in regard to this when he returns, saying, "How can I now go to Vrindavan without obstacles? May you all be pleased, meet and give me advice." Also, so he was meant to go to Vrindavan. He didn't actually go to Vrindavan. He came back to Puri. He still wants to go to Vrindavan. So he's saying, how can I go to Vrindavan without any obstacles? Please advise me. And then he says to the group among whom is seated Gadadhar, also I left Gadadhar and he felt sad. For that reason, I could not go to Vrindavan. In other words, I could feel that Gadadhar was feeling sad back in Nilachal, and that was weighing upon me. Then Gadadhar, becoming rapt with prem, grasped Prabhu's feet and humbly spoke, "Wherever you are, there is Vrindavan. There is the Yamuna, the Ganga, and all the Tirthas. Still, go to Vrindavan to teach the people. Please do what you think fit. Just ahead has come the 4 months of the rainy season, Prabhu. Reside in Nilachal for these 4 months. Thereafter, do what you have in mind. Go or stay as per your wish. Who can prohibit you?" So here Gadadhar is speaking knowing that it really is Mahaprabhu's wish to go to Vrindavan, and he's thinking, my behavior has also inhibited Mahaprabhu from fulfilling that wish. So let my behavior not weigh upon him to that extent. So he's saying, as far as I'm concerned, you don't need to go to Vrindavan. Wherever you are is Vrindavan. But if you want to go to Vrindavan and you feel that that's an important example to set for people, then go. But just now is not the best time, so stay for the monsoon. And when it's over, then if you wish, go. I'm not here to inhibit you or try to, influence you in such a way that you feel bad to go or something. He's showing that really he's deferent to the fulfillment of Mahaprabhu's wishes. Hearing this, all the bhaktas said at Prabhu's feet, "Pandit has made an appeal in accord with the wish of us all." So in other words, they all agree. If you want to go, go. We won't try to keep you here. but no point in going during the rainy season. It's not the right time to travel, so just let the rains pass and then go. By everyone's wish, Prabhu then remained for 4 months. And hearing of this, Prataparudra, the king of Puri, became blissful. That day, Gadadhar extended an invitation, and there Prabhu accepted alms with the bhaktas. So he got back, and then first thing he's having lunch at Gadadhar's place. Pandit's affection and Prabhu's tasting in relation to the alms, these two cannot be described with human capability. In other words, how lovingly Gadadhar then served Mahaprabhu, and how lovingly Mahaprabhu honored Gadadhar's hospitality. This was wonderful. After they had this, meeting on an uneven note, then the cadence finally came, so to speak, and they had this beautiful, loving exchange there in the garden of Tota Gopinath. In this way, Gaur's Leela is endless and boundless. I have described it in brief. Describing it elaborately is not possible. So, the author encapsulates this Leela in the verse under discussion by explaining that Sri Gadadhar Pandit forsook his vow of Kshetra Sannyas because he was, quote, disconcerted by separation from Sriman Mahaprabhu, and that his act of doing so was ultimately a triumph, in that he caused a showering of a milk ocean of prema for the lotus feet of Govinda. With the implication being that he demonstrated his profound prema for Sri Govinda, manifest in the form of Sriman Mahaprabhu, by his act in this way. So I take it that he's what Govardhana Bhatta, our author, wants to imply is that even though he left the service of his deity, Gopinath or Govinda, actually by doing all of this, he showered an expression of love for Govinda, because he was worshipping Mahaprabhu as Govinda and was, ready for the sake of that even to neglect his worship of the deity. So this shows, you could say, the ultimate nishta in Mahaprabhu, who he saw as Govinda. So this was like, that ikantik nishta, or that ultimate one-pointedness, being the very essence of all of the prema, the very essence of all of the bhakti that all of this is talked about. So this is like, a showering of love, ultimately. And perhaps also, I don't know, but because this took place in Nilachal on the bank of the ocean, perhaps there was an inclination towards this oceanic metaphor, in the sense that Gadadhar was living on the bank of the salt ocean, but it was like he gave rise to this milk ocean, or this, nectar ocean of prem, with his activity. So even though he seemed to lose face in ordinary society, in other words, common people might think, oh, he broke his sannyas, he left his deity, they might lose respect for him, not understanding these things. Then he's saying Jayati. No, he triumphed. In other words, he's glorious in doing even these things which typically result in inglory. I think he's trying to imply that. So, observance of vows and adherence to regulations can in general be supportive to the cultivation of bhakti to Sri Bhagavan. And a dedicated personal practice of daily image worship is also regarded as a compulsory and highly beneficial form of bhakti sadhana. Yet, with performance of all these comes social recognition and respect. In this case, Sri Gadadhar demonstrated the depth of his prema for Sriman Mahaprabhu by being ready and willing to lose the social recognition and respect that comes from these, so as to show his fixity was ultimately and markedly in the person of Sriman Mahaprabhu over and above all else. Although Sriman Mahaprabhu was undoubtedly satisfied by this deep expression of prema, he nevertheless insisted that Sri Gadadhar Pandit return to Nilachal and continue his residence and worship there, so as to set an example for posterity of the importance of sustaining one's devotional commitments. So I made those points earlier, but here in the written part at the end. So that's what I have for verse 3. So we'll come to verse 4. Shri Govindam Grin Kunja Runa Ruchinitaran Radhika Dasya Sindho Magnan Shrutta Purano Chayamadi Hridayam Nishchitat Meshatatvam Durbodhan Dushta Vrindair Brajapati Tanaya Sakta Bhakta Timanyan Bande Nanta Prabhavan Aparimita Kala Puritang Tirthapadan. Devoted to the reddish luster of the lotus of Sri Govinda's feet, absorbed in the ocean of servitude to Radhika, resolute in regard to the essential nature of the self and the Lord. After hearing, I think that should be true knowledge. After hearing the true knowledge or heart found in the multitudes of Puranas. Difficult to understand for the wicked, highly honorable for bhaktas devoted to the Prince of Braja, endowed with unlimited potency and replete with boundless ingenuity or arts. I offer obeisance to he whose feet are worthy objects of worship. So, what I find this verse challenging in the sense of who is it talking about? Who is being praised here? In my two sources, the Bengali source and the Hindi source, both translators just translate it literally and don't explain. So I have a few thoughts about how it could be interpreted. The qualificand in this verse is mentioned in the very final compound of the text, tirthapadan, which can be rendered literally as, quote, they whose feet are worthy objects of worship, or they whose feet are places of pilgrimage, or in various other ways. So the word tirtha can mean a holy place or a place of pilgrimage. It can mean an object of worship. It can also mean something that is purifying. So it can mean feet that are purifying, or a abode of purification, or a holy place, or a place that's meant to be worshipped, all of these kind of things. And the word tirtha also has a number of, broad usage within Sanskrit literature. So to speak of the, quote, tirtha padas is, open to interpretations. In other words, it doesn't, point precisely to any particular group or object just by convention. So because the author praises Radha and Krishna in the first verse of this composition, Sriman Mahaprabhu in the second verse, Sri Gadadhar Pandit in the third verse, his Shiksha Guru, his father, in the fifth verse, and then Sri Sanatan Pad and Sri Rupa Pad for the remainder of the composition, it is perhaps his intent in this fourth verse to offer praise to his Diksha Guru, since otherwise no homage would be offered to him in the composition. So this is one thought I have about how we could interpret it, is that this is a verse where he's praising his Guru. So now you might say, well, if it's about his Guru, then why is it all in the plural? So, using the plural to refer to a singular object of adoration is a common compositional technique employed in devotional literature. Oh dear, I'm getting a call. Let me just block that. Sorry. Where was I? Okay, using the plural to refer to a singular object of adoration is a common compositional technique employed in devotional literature, which can be observed in the work of Sri Sridhar Samipad, Sri Sanatana Gosvami Pad, Sri Jiva Pad, and other acaryas. The author also offers homage to his Diksha Guru in verse 3 of his Radhakunda Stava without mentioning his Guru's name, likely because it is stated in a citation in Hari Bhakti Vilas that one should keep the name of one's Guru private. It is thus possible that the author intends to refer to a singular object of adoration, his Diksha Guru, with the plural compound Tirthapadan in this verse. So this is one thought I have, is that it could be interpreted as a reference to his Guru. The qualities described throughout the verse are also all plausibly descriptions of a Guru following in the line of the teachings of Sri Rupa Pad and Sri Sanatana Pad, as will be demonstrated in the coming verses. So if we look at what's described, that he is devoted to the feet of Govinda, devoted to the service of Radha, that he has knowledge of the self and of Bhagavan that's derived from the Shastra, that he's honored by other bhaktas, that he's difficult to understand by non-bhaktas, that he's, quote, endowed with unlimited potency, meaning the Guru is seen to be like a conduit of Bhagavan or an agent of Bhagavan, and replete with boundless arts or ingenuity, means he's brilliant, or he enlightens me, and he's knowledgeable in all the various, arts and cultural features of bhakti. This is all plausibly a way that a guru could be praised. So perhaps this is his intention. It doesn't seem definitive to me that that's the case, but it's a possible way of seeing it. Other possible interpretations are that the object of adoration in this verse is collectively the gurus in the author's parampara, or, in general, other companions of Sriman Mahaprabhu. So perhaps it could also be that he's speaking in the plural to refer to his lineage, or to, if he's referring to Radhakrishna, Mahaprabhu, Gadadhar, and then the Tirthapadas, it could mean, and the other companions of Mahaprabhu who are, spoken of as Tirthapadas. Perhaps that's what he means. So I can't say definitively. As I said, I haven't seen any Sanskrit tika on this text to know if any other, earlier writers have weighed in on this, and the sources that I have don't say anything. So these are my thoughts, but I share them softly. In other words, I'm not, feeling that it's definitively this way or that way, but it's possible. All right, well, I think maybe I'll stop here for today, and we can continue further with this stotra. In the next verse, he offers praises to his father, his Shiksha Guru, in a very vivid manner. So we can dive into that in our next discussion. So if anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free. Yes?
My pranam, Jai Radha. Thank you so
Jai
much.
Shri
This is an interesting topic because Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Kaviraj explains or equates Gadadhar Pandit with Rukmini, I believe. And also, I'm not sure where this comes from, but I'm familiar with the comparison of Jagadananda Pandit to Satya. And in both cases, there's Shaktis of Krishna. So, we may argue, it's not really written Radharani, that Gadadhar is Radharani yet, but he's Shakti in, I would say, theological sense. Can you state that actually, why would Krishna, these two personalities be compared to Rukmini and Satyabhama? from Krishna Lila is that because Mahaprabhu is, I mean, to highlight the Mahaprabhu actually is Krishna, and he descended with his Shaktis, and if so, I'm just wondering why what's Dwarka has to do with Vrindavan? I mean, those are the queens of Mahishis from Dwarka. So just kind of sometimes I'm confused where the comparisons, the Nitya Parshats of Mahaprabhu carries some flavor of Dwarka. I'm just become perplexed about this comparison. So my question is basically around my two points, right? Yes, it's not Radharani, but it's still Shakti. And second point is why Dwarka? I'm just wondering. It's for me personally, it gives a little bit of clash from point of rasa.
Yeah, thank you. That's I also find the whole process of trying to draw literal parallels between Gaura Lila and Krishna Lila ultimately difficult. And even Kavi Karnapur, himself presents all these alternate views. If you read the Guru Ganesh Dipika, in many cases he'll give 2 or 3 options, like, and this person was seen like this or like that, and this person was seen like this and like that, and he, he says things like that, and then you see that in later eras, some of his views nobody talks about. In other words, it's very popular to think of Sarup Damodar like Lalita Sakhi and Ramananda Rai like Vishaka Sakhi, and they're together with Mahaprabhu, who's like Radharani in the Antilila. This is a very common viewpoint. But Kavi Karnapur doesn't say that at all. he doesn't, so sometimes it seems a certain popular understanding, people are comfortable letting go of Kavi Karnapur's view when they have another view that they like better. But at the same time, certain points of Kavi Karnapur's view, when they favor it, then they say, oh, Kavi Karnapur said this, So, personally, I don't feel that it's something that has to be boiled down, and that, in other words, that we have to get into this person was this person, like it's like a costume change and a set of characters, and they all have to literally be the same people. I don't feel like, in the infinite reality and the infinite incomprehensible capacity of Bhagavan, that we have to start like thinking in this limited set of like, okay, these are the characters, now where are they? And they all have to like perfectly have like parallel matching attitudes all the time. Like, it seems like an unnecessary kind of imposed limitation upon the infinite potential of Bhagavan for Leela. But that aside as a general viewpoint, it seems like in the way that Kavi Karnapur writes, that he's mostly writing with a reference to either role or character. In other words, that a person might have performed a certain role or had a certain character or disposition that was comparable to a particular participant in Krishna's Leela. So, applying that way of thinking to the statements of Kaviraj Goswami, when he speaks of Gadadhar in relation to Rukmini and Jagadananda Pandit in regard to Satyabhama, that perhaps his, quote, equation with them is not intended to be complete. In other words, that by comparing them to those Parikaras in Dwaraka, he's implying that they have the entirety of the mentality that those objects of comparison have. Perhaps it can be taken that they share certain characteristics and personality, and therefore are like the presence of these two in the roles that they play, or some of the types of exchanges that they had. So Satyabhama was known for having a more Vamya mood, Rukmini for having a more Dakshina mood. Jagadananda was known for having a more bold, challenging attitude. Gadadhar was known for having a more deferring, softer attitude. So perhaps he's drawing upon that Vamya Dakshina distinction, which is mentioned in regard to Rukmini and Satyabhama, and seeing a parallel to those character traits in Gadadhar and Jagadananda, and he's highlighting that by making the comparison without, and I'm just saying, perhaps, maybe without wanting or feeling the need to imply that the entirety of the mentality of Satyabhama perfectly matched the entirety of the mentality of Jagadananda. In other words, maybe just on that Vamya aspect there was a parallel and therefore a comparison. So that's one way of looking at it, where we're not sort of now trying to bring in a Aishvarya influenced Sthayi Bhav into Gora Lila. In other words, I think that's perhaps some of the tension that you're feeling, is that we typically think of the companions of Mahaprabhu as Braj Parikaras, or of having a mood that's comparable or equivalent to the Braj mood. So to compare them then to the Dwaraka mood seems incongruent. So one way, as I'm saying, one way of avoiding that problem, if you will, is just to see the, quote, equivalence as limited to a particular characteristic. So, for example, you probably remember in the Priti Sandarbha, when Jiva Gosvami is giving his definition of Priti, and he quotes this verse in the Vishnu Purana as his main point of reference, where it says, Ya pritira vivekanam vishaishvanapayini tvam manusmarata same hridayan napasarpatu. That this Priti, which the undiscerning have for objects of the senses, for Vishoy, let that same Priti not leave my heart. For, that Priti for you, let it not slip out, or let it not leave my heart as I go on always remembering you. So if you read that literally, then you would think, okay, the Priti that people have for sense objects, Prahlad Maharaj, the speaker of this verse, is saying he wants that Priti for Bhagavan, or he has that type of Priti for Bhagavan. So then the love that people have for in this world is the same thing as the love that Prahlad has for Bhagavan. It's the same Priti, it just has a different object. So that's not satisfying to Jiva Goswami, right? So if you remember in his analysis, he comes along and he says, it's not that the Priti that Prahlad is talking about is exactly the same Priti, even though grammatically that's what it says, but that the Priti that Vishoyis have for Vishoy and that Bhaktas have for Bhagavan has a similar lakshana, has a similar characteristic of being apayani, of being never-ending, or of always going on without ever running out. So it's that shared characteristic which is the basis of this equivalence that is spoken of. So he teases out that distinction so that people don't think, oh, okay, then the same love that I already know and experience here, I want that same sort of love there. So I'm referring to that kind of hermeneutical manner of interpretation, where the equivalence is based on a limited equivalence of a shared characteristic, and not a comprehensive equivalence between the two, the object and the subject of comparison.
Right.
So, what do you think?
Yeah, that's nice elaboration. I just come to mind the example, I don't know where it's come from, somewhere from Paramapurana perhaps, where the prayer is given that, please my Lord, let my love be, or attraction be, just like young boy towards young girl. That's the same, I would say, comparison, where you don't want to treat Lord as a young girl or boy, but the same intensity, same characteristics, but towards you, right? So
Exactly.
The point is to describe intensity, the characteristics, the mood, not the object, right? Right. So I think that another things come to my mind actually, because if this is another thing, but I'm also listening to other development of different traditions beyond Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is that more remote conclusions or development of the religion or thought from the beginning of the particular tradition, the less chances of this being actually authentic. So, the best authentic and the true authenticity is in those who describe the early scriptures, the early writings at the beginning of the tradition. A later development may or may not be accurate. Is it correct to conclude that? So I'm referring to this particularly, that what you mentioned in the beginning, that comparing Gaddar to Radha came from 16th, 17th century, right? 16th and 17th centuries writers, not at the beginning of the tradition. And I'm also wondering, not to minimize, but is that any congruent assessment that actually it's best to always stick into to original writings as opposed to later writings?
Well, I mean, as a couple things on that. One is, as I quoted, Kavi Karnapur himself speaks of Gadadhar being Radha. He's as early a writer as any.
Okay.
I mean, he's, a contemporary of the Goswamis in the 16th century. So, it's not that the view of Radha being Gadadhar came later, so to speak. It's there, and he's mentioning that it was held by... Anyway, something like that. That's one point. But as far as notions of authenticity, I would say yes and no. In a Gaudiya perspective, according to, you could say, a classical reverential attitude in which Bhagavan and his parikaras are understood to have descended as Mahaprabhu and his companions, and they're all the Gaurangara Sangi Gani Nitya Siddha Korimani Sejai Brajendra Sutta Pash. If we see these companions of Gauranga as the Nitya Siddhas of Krishna Lila, then we also will reach Krishna. That kind of classical view that Narottam and the others of the first and second generation followers of these companions established, then we can say that there's definitely value in giving weight to the works of Nitya Partikaras specifically. And that what will come from the pen of a Nitya Partikara deserves some very special consideration that the writings of later generations, whether they're sadhan siddhas or whoever they are, I mean, as great as they may be, it's difficult to see them as having equivalent hermeneutical weight, so to speak, as these Nitya Partikaras themselves, who are conceived of as writing about and revealing the very thing that they're embodiments of. Now, you see in some wings of the Gaudiya tradition and in other traditions that there will appear waves of, so to speak, where people just decide, okay, we're going to revere so-and-so also as a Nitya Parikara. And we're going to regard this person as being another person who came down, who says they couldn't come down at other times. Maybe they did, and we think this person did, so we consider this person's writing of the highest authority or of equal authority or what have you. So that's a deep choice of, or an act of faith, so to speak, on the part of an individual. And at the same time, where did these parshads of Mahaprabhu become Nitya Parikaras in the first place? They became ultimately from faith, of earlier persons. And, the whole of the Shastra, the whole of these things, ultimately is all underwritten by a self-signed certificate of our own faith in them. In other words, that we have faith in the Bhagavatam as the, ultimate culmination of Vedic literature. That's our faith. And we can have conviction in all the words of the Bhagavatam, but that's not the way everybody sees it. That's not the faith that everyone has. And some, more broadly speaking, there's, the classical viewpoint of astika and nastikya and acceptance of texts that are in the Veda or derived and respecting of Vedic authority versus those that are not. And then those who are not are the pashandas, and they're rejected, and their faces are not to be seen. And, all this kind of rigid division is made between these two groups. But yet, globally and historically, within all of that that's classified as like the untouchable, unseeable other, there are also long-standing spiritual traditions filled with saints and mystic poetry and persons of incredible character and, expression and, what by most impartial analysis would be a richness of human culture, to say the least, So for us to come along and be like, no, this only is divine and that is not, that's a decision, that's a viewpoint that some people may make, and they can then quote whatever text they want to quote to back themselves up. And then people on the other side of the fence will do the same thing, quoting their books to say, this person is the prophet, or this person is the so-and-so, and those who don't accept him go to hell, and, he's the one, and, and it becomes ultimately, two people arguing, appealing to different sources of authority, and feeling a sense of duty and conviction in those authorities. But those authorities, in one sense, are ultimately created by the faith that those people have in them. So you can't really escape the dynamic where you're ultimately leveraging your own opinion into this authority to then decide that this other person is wrong. So it's not ultimately clean cut that this is, the one and only way that things have to be seen. We all, as individuals, have to bear the responsibility for the convictions that we hold, or for the traditions and the texts that we exalt. And so when we realize that that's integral to following any tradition and following any text or following any lineage or what have you, then to then use that authority that's a product of our own faith to then say that these other things have no authority, or they're void of authority, or they're wrong, is still a roundabout way of just deciding, I think that's wrong, or I don't even want to spend the time to really evaluate the value of it. I'm just going to stick to this system and box that I've invested myself in, and that's it. So when you realize that you're, so to speak, vulnerable like that, to then go along and look at people who do, let's say, step partially out of a certain cultural or traditional scope of authority, let's say in the case of accepting the authority of a certain text or a certain lineage, but then also electing to value the wisdom or the teaching or something of someone outside of that, or of someone who came later from that. To really go along and be like, no, that's inauthentic and bogus. It's like, who is anybody to really say that ultimately when, whatever you're appealing to make that decision might be logically provable based on whatever principles that are in the authority that you follow or in the textual tradition that you study. But even that is still, what you yourself have invested with authority, so to speak.
Alice too.
Excuse me?
No, no sound.
I hear some sound from your end. All right. Is there still no sound for you? Can anyone else who's here confirm if this is on my end or on the other end? I don't hear anything. So, is no one else hearing me? Is this a problem with my connection?
I can also hear only background sound.
Okay.
Baba, I can hear you. I can hear.
Okay, then maybe it's a technical end on our technical issue on our friend's end. Okay, well, I'll see if he comes back, but I more or less I'll just conclude and say that I more or less made the point I think I was trying to make, which is that, I think we should be cautious in, passing absolutist judgment over anyone else's faith or how they wish to invest that, and we can, be conscious of the contours of the tradition or the textual corpus or the lineage or what have you that we invest our faith, and we can try to understand the the ins and outs of that, if you will, and we can try to follow that in our life, but at the same time that we need to then adopt an air of superiority over others or go around flunking others. I don't feel the need to do that, and I feel even that can betray the spirit of following the path of bhakti and following the values of being respectful to everyone and humble and so forth, and that if we can find genuine relish and meaning and substance in whatever it is that we have faith in and whatever practice that we have, then that itself will give us a sense of peace and strength in what we're doing, and not, and the need to sort of prop up our faith or, convince our ego that we're solid, so to speak, by belittling someone else can feel not only unnecessary, but even be seen as kind of a type of weakness. So, anyway, that's what comes to mind on that topic.
Yeah, I lost you for a long time, so I just got right now your last sentence when you mentioned about ego. Anyway, I'll listen to the recording, but thank you for elaborating on this. Yeah. So in this context, like for example, Vishwanath Chakravarti, is he Nitya Parshad?
I mean, what can you say? I mean, some people may see him that way, some people can't. Who's to say? Someone after him is gonna say. Some may believe that, some may not. Some may say it's hard to know. And personally, I don't feel the need to take a decision, if you will. I personally feel profound adoration for Vishwanath Chakravarti and relish what he writes and his perspectives and his discussions, and it's so enriching to whatever I've understood or whatever I'm able to contemplate. I love it, So it's great, and how then you want to kind of canonize him into this. Personally, I don't, for me, that doesn't really change anything. In other words, I feel his work and his contributions speak for themselves and warrant deep. They're worth studying. They're worth contemplating. They're worth taking to heart in a very serious way. And as far as who exactly is who or who's descended when, I'm just a conditioned soul. I don't have that kind of vision. So who am I to judge?
Yes.
And
some
some persons may have written later about that. Obviously, some people will assert that. Other persons will deny that based on certain lines of reasoning. For me, I don't know, and I don't feel like I have to know.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this is quite interesting topic with all this authenticity and versus faith. I think faith is the only thing really qualifier for moving forward. And faith, in a true sense, meaning Shastra, Shastriya Shraddha, not just one own subjective. Although this own subjective conviction plays the role, but we know from Jiva Gosvami that the Shastriya Shraddha is the essence of Shraddha. Anyway, thank you so much for the celebration. This is really, really nice. And I'm looking forward to more reading of this book. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you so much. So we're just making our way through the intro here, and then we'll hear some sublime talks of Rupa Sanatana's contributions, and we'll try to look into some of the subtleties of what our author highlights in that regard. So that's to come. Vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Go, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.
Jai Shri Guru, Jai Go, Jai Shri Radhe Shyam.